After the death and resurrection of Christ, and on the day of Pentecost, the church began. The church was and is even to this day simply made up of believers who follow Christ. And so the men and women that followed Christ were the church. They were centered in Jerusalem, and their leadership was the 11 remaining disciples. Of those disciples, Peter definitely stepped up to become the leader, just as Christ said he would. While the church is persecuted by some Jews and Romans, it continues to flourish and grow. Many churches are started by many different people all over the place in all directions. You had the Church of Antioch. You had all the churches that Paul would later start. You had the Church of Rome, and a lot more. At some point in the book of Acts, it becomes clear the Bishop of Jerusalem becomes James, the brother of Jesus. Of course, as the New Testament clearly shows, Paul became on that same level with the disciples fairly quickly. Peter, Paul, the disciples are all out starting churches and spreading the word of God. The church in Rome was just that, a church in Rome. The church is always made up of all believers, but if you had to give it a home base, it would be Jerusalem. At no point in this story is the Church of Rome declared more authoritative than any other church, especially the church in Jerusalem. In the 300s, when Emperor Constantine made Christianity legal, that definitely gave a leg up to the Church of Rome, being that Jerusalem had been destroyed in AD 70, and since the city of Rome is the capital of the Roman Empire, it seems logical that the church in Rome, the capital of the empire, would also be a powerful, wealthy, and influential church. Were they the original church? They were not. That was the Church of Jerusalem. Did the church later morph into a church guided by the Roman church and the bishops of Rome? Yes, but they were not the original church. After the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the day of Pentecost, Peter was the first leader of the church. He was that first leader just as Christ predicted that he would be. He headed up the church in Jerusalem, which was the original church. At one point, James, the brother of Jesus, took over as the bishop of the church of Jerusalem, and Peter left to go be a missionary and to preach the gospel. We really don't know all that he did, but it is quite possible that he started churches, and it seems likely that he did end up in Rome. We know more specifically that Paul started many churches all over the known world of that time. There is very little evidence to say that Peter started the church in Rome. It seems more likely the church was already there and that neither he or Paul started it. And to call him the first bishop of Rome also seems like a stretch, but for the sake of argument, let's just say that he was. Let's say he's the bishop of Rome, James is the bishop of Jerusalem, and Paul and the other disciples are on that same level of authority. In the 60s, James, Peter, and Paul would all be killed, martyred. And if it's true that Linus took Peter's place as the bishop of Rome, that in no way would mean he took Peter's place as the head of all the church. That's a dramatic leap without evidence. It's not even clear that Peter was still the real leader of the church. You could call that James. You could call that Paul. Maybe you could call it the other disciples. It's fair to say that he was, though, but it's not fair to say that whatever position he held at the time of his death, Bishop of Rome, that person would become the head of the church going forward. That doesn't make any sense. We definitely know the Apostle John was still alive, and if anything, he would have been the de facto leader of the church at that time. But let's just say that Peter was the first bishop of Rome, and that there has been bishops of Rome ever since, up into the current pope. But for the Catholics to say that that gives the pope authority that Peter had over all the church, quite frankly, is ridiculous.